Please, this is a cry for help. I've spent all of my gold doubloons on Clash of Clans, James. Hello, I am Tony from Tony Two Tone, and I am back with the next 5 games on the IGN Top 100 RPGs of all time list. While you have all been out getting laid and enjoying your summer, I have been inside studying the art of the blade and protecting the sweet damsel known as my virginity. I've been itching to talk about these next 5 games with you, and that's exactly what I plan on doing. Just a forewarning, this episode is a fucking amalgamation of years worth of YouTube video essays, so I hope you're ready for me to retread familiar territory. Now, I want to keep this intro brief, as I've already talked about what this series is about, but I think it's worth retreading the basics. I plan on playing every game on the IGN list of top 100 RPGs and relaying my thoughts and opinions on each entry and video format. Each video covers 5 games, and in this video I'm talking about placement 6 through 10. After discussing each RPG, I will assign a letter grade from F to S+, and place it into my overall definitive personal RPG tier list in approximate order of enjoyment, so placement matters. Each game gets exactly 1 playthrough front to back, and if any particular game piques your interest, I will link multiple videos on YouTube that I personally enjoy that cover each game in a more in-depth setting. Also, forewarning, there will be spoilers galore, so prepare yourself for that. But all these games are old as fucking dust, so deal with it. Specifically in this video, my usual format had to be altered because only one of the games had traditional companions, so I will alter that section for the games when needed. As for what that change will be, not entirely sure, but don't even worry about it. I got plans and concepts of plans, so I'm bing chilling. So, with all that doggy dookie out of the way, let's jump right into the video games. Hell yeah, partner.
Número 6.
Planescape Torment. Developed by Black Isle Studios, a legendary development studio in the CRPG landscape, Planescape was released in 1999. To critical praise and downright piss-poor sales. It is lauded as a cult classic, which is fancy speak for didn't sell a fucking thing. However, this did not stop Planescape from spreading via word of mouth and positive reviews, remarking on its deviation from the tried and true formula of other RPGs of the time. This game also jump-started the career of Chris Avellone, maybe one of the most famous figures in all of RPG history, and I promise you, this is not the last time we'll see him on this list. I played the enhanced edition of Planescape Torment, released by Beamdog, which for all intents and purposes is essentially the original game in all of its glory, just updated to run better on modern systems. This is not the first time I have ever picked up Planescape Torment, as I had gone through the opening Dustman Crematorium before, but I just felt like I was not quite in the right mindset to get the most out of this game, so I put it down. But that's the beauty of this series, to strap me down in the Clockwork Orange chair and force my ADHD-riddled peanut brain to finish a goddamn video game. So, let us discuss. The story. Where do I start with the story? It's fantastic, phenomenal, overflowing with philosophical concepts without ever coming off as preachy or as just meaningless pondering. Engaging and challenging, asking many questions but never delivering answers, but rather leaving it up to the player to seek their own. I could endlessly pontificate about each scene that sucked me in and left me glued to the screen for hours on end, but I won't quite do that. I'll leave that to the videos in the description, rather focus on some of my favorite aspects of the story. This is one of the few stories that I've ever encountered that fully utilizes the amnesiac protagonist trope to its fullest extent. Normally this setup is used as a crutch to introduce a character as a blank slate, so it doesn't come off as awkward when NPCs deliver walls of exposition at you, and without a doubt Planescape can do this as well. But the beauty is in where it goes from there. The more you learn about yourself in Planescape Torment, the more you come to find out you're kind of a fucker, an absolute shit stirrer, son of a bitch. But more than likely, the character you're playing up to that point is not a shit-filled diaper, but rather an empathetic person who feels regret for their actions of their past life incarnations. So the question is raised, what can change the nature of a man? And that's what this entire story revolves around. Should we be held accountable for our past sins? And are we something more than our decisions? Questions like this are raised constantly, leading to a very gripping plot that goes above and beyond the typical story beats of a video game. This game is often compared to a book, with phrases like quote-unquote reading simulator or interactive book being thrown around, but I don't think these critiques are in complete bad faith. I think these phrases come from the headiness and the deeper themes this game tackles that are so often surface level in the video game format. This game goes above and beyond, and the story is just as pertinent now as it was in 1999. I did get a little ahead of myself, so let me back up a smidgen and give a quick synopsis of the story itself. We, the Giga Chad abbed up nameless one, wake up in a mortuary with complete amnesia where we meet Mort, our first companion. I will discuss Mort in depth in the companion section, so hold on to your panties. Mort then informs us of a tattoo on our back that is a message to ourselves from our previous incarnation. Oh yeah, did I mention we are an immortal being who loses their memory every time we die? Just think of it like D&D Memento. Anywho, from here we escape and go on a journey to uncover our past, discover how we ended up in the mortuary and how we came to be the immortal nameless one. The story is pretty succinct with an average runtime of roughly 42 hours, and in this time frame, so much story is packed into the adventure. Every corner of the world seemed to give so much background on Sigil, the city we find ourselves in, or rather the plane of existence we find ourselves in. Yeah, shit gets real abstract. Throughout the game, I feel like a little loot goblin but for the plot, rummaging through any piece of trash I pick up to learn more about the world my character exists within, or my character themselves. The world building is so fantastic, and it utilizes the weirder and more avant-garde aspects of D&D in the best possible way. We're traveling dimensions through the multitude of doors, which is slang for portals in Sigil, and experiencing monsters and creatures from every plane of existence. It also juggles all of this with a deeply personal plot that intertwines with the various companions we meet, all without losing me in the jumble of exposition. This tightrope Planescape Torment walks is brilliant, and is one of the reasons you often see this game at the top of best stories in video game lists. Get in here, fuck off. One of my favorite scenes in the entire game is the scene with Ravel, a night hag who is intimately familiar with your past self, and the scene sort of serves as the turning point in the story where everything starts coming together. The scene itself is gripping, and I distinctly remember feeling so invested in the plot in a way in which few pieces of media in general have ever held my attention so tightly. I was enraptured with the setup, the dialogue, and its effects on the characters. Truly one of the best video game scenes of all time. However, this does lead to a slight problem I have with this game. It's a lot. It asks for you to invest your energy, focus, and complete attention in a way that makes it very difficult to just jump into. Get fucked, bozo. Get out of here. Skedaddle. Get out. Get going. Dude, shut up. This falls into a weird gray zone, which I wouldn't classify as a negative nor a positive, but just something to point out. Every time I was ready to play Planescape Torment, I had to prepare myself mentally for the outing I was about to engage in, the same way I would for like a 3.5 hour long foreign film. It's not something easy to just jump into and play for an hour or two at the end of a day. However, again, this is simultaneously positive and a negative, so take it with a grain of salt. With all of that, I do have to say that throughout Planescape Torment, I never felt myself drifting off or just running through the motions as I played. Every conversation, every piece of dialogue had me enraptured fully, looking forward to the next secret left to be unveiled. I have golden retriever brain, so it's easy for me to mentally wander off while playing games, but that never happened here, which is a monumental undertaking for someone as simple as I. I also like the lack of a central villain. Sure, there are douchebags that come along through the plot, but all of them either have their own valid reasoning for their actions or are just pieces of a bigger universe. This lack of villain puts all the focus and emphasis on the story itself and centralizes the main struggle with you. In essence, you are pretty much the hero and villain of your own story, which is unique in the way this game presents that dilemma. All in all, Planescape Torment has the best story I have encountered thus far. Now for the presentation. Here we come to a category that is more of a mixed bag. I've previously stated that I love the graphic system of the Infinity Engine games like Baldur's Gate and Icewind Dale that have 3D sprites in front of pre-rendered backgrounds, and I stand by that. I love the look of this game, but it did age in a very specific way that I could understand not being your cup of tea. I remember playing Baldur's Gate 1 for the first time and thinking, what the fuck is this geezer shit? Now that I have lost that gene that cares so heavily about modern appealing graphics, I love the look of this game. The character sprites themselves are fantastic, with some of my favorite, including the Ratman, Ignis himself, who stands out so drastically, and monsters from various realms. I think what especially pushes these characters forward is the design itself, not just the 3D sprite. The concepts themselves are great, and these sprites just reflect that. I also enjoy the feel of the various locations in Planescape Torment. Every single environment seems to be covered in a layer of hellish dirt and steel, leading to this very dilapidated industrial landscape that is consistent throughout the playtime. This feeling is also reflected in the soundtrack, somewhat. The soundscape is what really drives this home, with an ambient hum that follows you throughout, and sound design filling out the corners of Sigil in a way that makes the places you visit feel real. The music, on the other hand, is whatever. It's fine. It's acceptable. It just feels like a bummer because with a banging industrial soundtrack, it could have really brought this feeling to its full realization. There is a whole controversy about a scrapped industrial soundtrack, but if that interests you, you can look that up on your own time. I just wanted to mention that was the original idea, but unfortunately it fell through. What we have left is tolerable, with each theme, whether it be the main menu or the battle theme, feeling appropriate, but nothing that sticks with me when I put this game down. Finally, I thought I would talk about the UI. It has this cool steampunk feel to it that incorporates metallic imagery and gear strewn about in a way that just hammers home the feeling Planescape Torment is shooting for. As scrotum sucking as the combat is, I do have to say the spell animations are spectacular. Of the three major Infinity Engine games, Baldur's Gate, Icewind Dale, and Planescape Torment, I think these spell animations might be my favorite. Almost every high-level spell has its own cutscene, and these spells feel appropriately grand in size and scale. Really top-shelf shit. Moving on to progression. Progression is pretty wiener, to be totally frank. Yeah, wiener, to be frank, because Frank's wieners. Since this is very obviously a text/conversation-based game, the attributes you need to max out are all the social ones, like charisma, wisdom, and intelligence. However, doing all of this shows no impact in game. Yes, it does technically unlock new dialogue options, but you would have no fucking clue that this was the case if you're unfamiliar with the system. I've seen some people argue that this is a positive, stating that hiding the dialogue check pass makes you read through your options and figure out which one is the best choice. So even though you have a new choice, you still must engage with the dialogue to understand that you have unlocked a new route through your attributes. This prevents your reptoid brain from just clicking the choice that is unlocked as soon as you see it, and in concept, I don't mind this. However, in practice, it leads to level ups feeling meaningless because you don't directly see the impact of investment. I think a system like Disco Elysium does this concept best by showing you the check you have to pass with a percentage, and each point invested in that skill leads to a higher percentage of passing. True. Planescape Torment just needs some sort of indicator that due to the decisions you have made during level up, you're rewarded with additional choices in dialogue. I think there is a good middle ground between being too obvious with this choice and being too obtuse, making level ups feel pointless. You might say, well, you can invest in other attributes too, which is true, but these other attributes are combat based, and as you will hear in abundance from me, the less said about combat in Planescape, the better. The plot progression, however, is fun. Each step in the story requires the solving of each puzzle, figuring out what to take to who and when, to find out more about the Nameless One's past actions, which is where the fun lies. Some of these puzzles or mysteries genuinely had me wondering what the fuck I'm Scooby-Dooby doing. I'm not too proud to admit that I had to check the old video game guides on multiple occasions. I will caveat this by saying that it's probably not the game's fault, as stumping me in a puzzle is the equivalent of beating a baby in a game of chess. More about the lack of wrinkles in my brain than the difficulty of these puzzles, so your experience may vastly differ. The itemization is also fun and unique. Weapons in general suck ass because of the combat system, but the things you can use as weapons are very entertaining, including teeth for Mort, various shanks for Anna, and your own arm for yourself. The consumables are things like drops of blood, dirty rat tails, and various other abstract items that make little to no sense. Tattoos are equipable, with you being able to remove and slap these bad boys on at will. It's also playfully lacking in any logic that I kind of love it. Well, shit, combat time. The biggest stain on this game's reputation. No way to sugarcoat it, so here we go. This game's combat is genuinely the most dung beetle infested, maggot crawling, blackest, most sludge-like pile of elephant shit I have ever seen. Holy fuck, every time I had to fight, I wanted to enter my own sigil-like maze purgatory where this combat system does not fucking exist. Reminds me of high school when I was playing 2K, stay with me, in my career. It's like, stop with all this fucking plot, I want to go back to Skadunkin. Except now it's like, stop with all this action, I want to go back to reading. Fuck, man, I'm such a fucking loser. I will asterisk this with the fun little factoid that spell animations go hard and are genuinely very enjoyable to see. Yet, there's nothing worse than a cool animation of a space laser beam firing from the heavens to destroy your opponent just to see a little red 7 pop up indicating you did a whopping 7 damage with God's laser beam. Ass, wait for it, in the hole. I found myself just auto-battling even with my fragile characters because the act of actually trying to engage with the systems is more of a kidney stone in my penis than just spamming health items and brute forcing my way through encounters. I cannot specify enough how completely and utterly awful this system is. This might even be more forgivable if the game did not insist on spamming encounters at you every 5 steps. I can totally understand as a development team devoting all your work time and energy to focusing on the writing, setting, and characters and leaving the combat system lacking. What I can't forgive is being aware your combat sucks and insisting upon so many combat-based approaches and fights. The gameplay in the Hells locations is set perfectly, because they are literally hell just to get through. What's even the point of the classes? I tried to build Anna as a sneaky rogue, but after trying to spam stealth, when completely hidden, failing multiple times, finally succeeding in approaching the enemy just to fucking miss the backstab, I was donezo. checked completely out. And don't even get me fucking started on the Rubicon. I chose the mage class because I found the spell is most entertaining, but I just gave up on spells eventually and was just auto-attacking every encounter or running away. Okay, get me the fuck out of the combat section of this game and back into the positives. Upon looking back on my script, I've come to realize I've been pretty tough on this game and its flaws. I just want to reiterate, the strength from this game comes almost entirely from plot and characters in this universe. Oh baby. The world building is done so elegantly that you can get lost in Sigil and find yourself talking to any and every character just to acquire more dialogue about yourself or Sigil. It's a masterclass in writing, and it's unfortunate that so many of the gamier aspects of Planescape Torment are lacking, because the story is special. With that being said, let's move into the discussion of your companions. Very often you'll see Planescape Torment being heralded as the best cast of companions in RPGs. And while I disagree with the sentiment, I can see why people think this. I think this game has two of the best characters in RPGs, bar none. And the rest of the cast is pretty okay, but those two do such heavy lifting that I can understand the sentiment of best cast of companions that so many people espouse. So let's discuss each companion, going from least favorite to favorite. Yeet. In last place, we have the very lovable and forgettable hunk of metal known as Nordum. As you'll come to see throughout this top 100 list, this archetype of robot companion gets so fucking old so quickly, especially in a game that has so much going on already. I know I defended Robo in the Chrono Trigger section in the last video, but Robo's story felt natural to the plot, and his personality was more likable than Nordum's. You did not need to include an entire technology-based AI subplot here. It feels surface level and out of place. We are one, I am one, gaining self-realization, beep, beep, boop. Shut the fuck up. I do not care. Nordum's sprite is really cool, along with being a capable companion in combat. It's just, I don't care about combat in this game. I care about how interesting a companion is, and Nordum just is not. Especially considering the fucking gauntlet you need to endure just to get him. No thanks. Next up is Valor. Now, we get to one of my biggest appreciations for the companions in this game, and that's their connection to the Nameless One's past life. They all are intertwined with your story in unique ways, and that adds to the connection your current Nameless iteration has with them. It's brilliant, especially considering they all were treated pretty awfully by you in the past, but still choose to follow you once again. I really enjoy Valor. Valor? I really enjoy no, it's definitely Valor. I really enjoy Valor and his story. It's just you get him way too late to form a strong connection with him, and he's very my way or the highway. This is kind of cool because if you continually challenge his concept of justice at all costs, and what that even means, he will literally kill you. I can respect this. But this also means there's not much room for development or growth since he is a mercy killer, the law enforcement of Sigil, and what you see is what you get. Love his voice acting, story, and his design. You just get him way too late to justify putting him any higher. Next is Ignis, who I have found to be surprisingly very dividing among the fandom. This is surprising because he doesn't really have much of a character. He's an insane wizard who had a severe fascination with fire magic / arson, and as a punishment was forced to burn alive for all of existence. This, understandably, led Ignis to going absolutely batshit crazy. This leads to conversations with him feeling super entertaining and very off-putting. He teaches you many great fire spells, and I just enjoy his character design and the role he plays. Also, if you are a little rosy-cheeked goody two-shoes like me, you will end up having to battle him during the finale, which I think is a cool full circle moment. Many people don't like him because he's a literal fucking lunatic, but I find this endearing. Next up is Fall from Grace. She is a succubus who decides to run a brothel for the pleasures of the mind rather than the body, serving against her succubus nature. Fall from Grace had the coolest concept and introduction to any of the characters in this game. I find this idea so fascinating and interesting, and whenever she talks about the gratification of the mind, I am enraptured in the conversation. However, she unfortunately did not live up to this concept and kind of comes off a little, bland. There's not much personality here, and all of her struggles equate to Fall from Grace saying something smart. The person she's talking to then says, "You're not as perfect as you portray." Fall from Grace then goes, rinse and repeat. She is a well-written character who I enjoyed. I just think there was depth still to be explored that could have led to me loving her character rather than just liking it. Next is Anna. She is a tiefling who is, sort of the inverse of Fall from Grace. Not that interesting as a concept, but loaded with personality and emotion. She sticks out because of her abrasiveness, which at first I found annoying, but eventually found endearing. All of my issues from her stem from her status as, how do I put this nicely? an absolute sex mascot for the horniest breed of humans known as the Gamer, the most sexually frustrated group of citizens in the world. She would absolutely fail the Bechdel test fantastically, but she is a memorable companion filled with a funny voice and fiery personality that somehow still stands out in this varied group. Now for the two heavyweights, the Juggernauts, carrying the infamy of the companions of Planescape Torment, Dakon and Mort. With no exaggeration, deciding between these two was one of the hardest decisions I have had to make in my rankings. They're both that good, but a decision has to be made. Next up is Dakon. Dakon is a Githzari. Next up is Dakon. Dakon is a Githzari, an enlightened alien race in D&D lore that would take far too long to properly explain, so just take the description Buddhist aliens as reference point. Dakon leads to some of the most interesting writing I have read in general, whether that be in video game format or regular literature. I don't know who wrote for his character, but they deserve a fat fucking raise. His sword, a katana, changes its shape and sharpness based off his mood, and the way the writers portray how Dakon is feeling through the description of his weapon is absolutely brilliant. Also, the growth we see of his character is almost the inverse of a typical character development. We first see him as a wise, unshaken believer of Zerthamon, a Githzari, almost religious legend, and as the story unravels, we come to find out he is deeply conflicted. A terror-ridden being who has found himself at the mercy of you, the Nameless One. The conversations you have with Dakon about the artifact he possesses and the eventual truth of it is some of the most heartbreaking writing I've experienced. It also simultaneously packs loads of Githzari lore into it without coming off as boring. I was always looking forward to what he had to say, and his character is flat out amazing. Yet, there is still one more companion who I enjoy slightly more. Mort. First of all, he is a floating skull. Dub. Secondly, he has the most personality of anyone in this game, having the inflection of an old-time cartoon mobster, while also having the most human story of anyone in the game, despite him being a detached, deceased head. Starting off mistrustful of him, only to learn more and more of the secrets he is hiding, is a fun mystery to solve and unravel. All the while, you still love Mort because of the hilarious dialogue and willingness to follow you. I know I said combat does not matter in rankings, but I just wanted to say combat would somehow be even worse if it wasn't for the weight Mort pulls as the resident tank. Learning his story and the torment he carries for being responsible for your condition is the most interesting subplot of the game. It balances the feeling of betrayal with empathy because you can't help but loving the bag of bones. He carries with him such guilt and burden, and growing the relationship between you two that allows him to open up to you about the truth is so rewarding. It feels like a genuine bond, and this causes me to rank Mort as the best companion in Planescape Torment, and possibly all of RPGs. So where does that leave us? I have gushed about the story and writing and lambasted just about everything else. So the question comes to, do the positives outweigh the negatives? And if so, by how much? I will be the first to tell you, this game is not perfect. And if you're approaching this game like a Baldur's Gate or action-oriented system like Icewind Dale, you will be severely disappointed. However, if you're willing to come along for the ride and invest yourself into the story of the Nameless One, there is a game here that is unlike any I have played. The positives absolutely outweigh the negatives. So much in fact that I looked past the dog shit combat and finished this game and yearned for more after the credits. That speaks volumes to my enjoyment. I'm going to give Planescape Torment an A. I would probably slide it underneath Chrono Trigger because I prefer that game as a whole, but Planescape Torment is absolutely a game I would recommend, and dare say, it is an essential gaming experience for all RPG fans.
Updated my journal.
Day thất hầu.
Secret of Mana. First off, shout out to my girlfriend for soldiering through this co-op game with me. Love you, Snookums. Secret of Mana, released in 1993, was developed and published by Square for the SNES. This game is widely regarded as the first action RPG, not ARPG, which while similar is vastly different, but action RPG. Whether it is actually the first or the first to get widescreen recognition is debatable, but I genuinely do not give a fuck. I am merely stating this to emphasize it was a trailblazer game that people put on top of best SNES games in general. So here it is at number 7 on IGN's RPG list. Not gonna lie, this is a game I've never even had waning interest in, but I have been pleasantly surprised by other games I had low expectations for, so I made sure to keep an open mind. True. Red Dead, you're ruining the world. Jesus! You fat idiot. There are multiple versions of this game, including a 2018 remake that is unanimously crowned as total fucking trash, but I am playing the Collection of Mana for the Nintendo Switch, which includes the original Mana trilogy, which Secret of Mana is a part of. From my understanding, it is essentially a complete port for the Switch, so that's the version I went with. And let me tell you, it crashed multiple times and even lagged at some point, so thanks Nintendo. Neat that I paid money for a port that doesn't even run properly. Quick pro gamer tip, maybe skip this version and see if you can find an ulterior way to play this one. Not that I would have any clue where you could find such a thing. Maybe, I don't know, sneak into Asmongold's cockroach-infested Resident Evil mansion he lives in and take his copy. I don't know. So without further ado, let's get started with the story. So what is the story? No, I'm actually asking, what the fuck is the story? My girlfriend and I were both scratching our noggins, forgetting what the hell we were doing and why are we going to different places, but I don't think that seriously matters. Let's be blunt here. Between you, me, and the two cats roaming in and out of this room, the game's focus is not on its story. In fact, I would garner a guess that it's not even its secondary focus. Quick synopsis. You get booted from a village for pulling a sacred sword out of a stone which unleashes monsters on the village you were taken in by, which the village blames on you. Probably rightfully so. From here, a soldier dude recognizes your sword and says you should re-energize it by seeking out the mana seeds from various temples. Also important to note, I forgot all of this and I'm just reading off what the wiki article says. Huh, what do you know? Anyways, something about an emperor's evil generals and the fortress of mana and you need to stop them, yada yada. Totally unimportant, just know you team up with a girl looking for her boyfriend and a little wee man looking for something? I don't really know. Look, again, plot is not the focus of Secret of Mana. In fact, isn't the real Secret of Mana the friends we made along the way? I jest, but there are some elements that I enjoy, one being the downright unseriousness of it all. After playing so many games with high stakes and world-ending consequences, it's kinda refreshing to play a game where I fucking rescue Santa. The goofy elements imbued into the script perfectly match the lighthearted tone of the game, and I can get down with that. I don't need uber direness with every step your character takes. A bit of whimsy is a-okay avec moi. Our main villain is this dude named Thanatos, who is also apparently the personification of death in Greek mythology. Knowledge. In the scope of Secret of Mana, he is a general of the Emperor and kicks off this plan to raise the Fortress of Mana in the first place. I don't know why he's doing all this, but the sprite looks evil, so that's good enough for me. On top of that, you also have the other evil generals who frankly just look gay as hell. If you're uncomfortable with me using the word gay like that, don't even worry about it. My girlfriend is bisexual, I can say that. I'm kind of running out of things to say about the story. If you held a gun to my head and asked me to pick a favorite plot point, I'd probably just beg you to pull the trigger to save us some time. I feel bad for shortchanging you guys on the story, but you rescue Santa Claus. What the fuck do you want me to say about the story? Now we move on to the presentation. In a complete dichotomy shift from the last section, I cannot oversell the quality of the presentation. This is the epitome of cozy 16-bit graphical games. The plethora of different environmental landscapes that spread the gambit of seasons leads to such a fuzzy feeling whenever you play this game. From the warm, luscious, sand-filled desert section to the sparkling glint of frost in the winter wonderland, to the pastel glow of the Mushroom Kingdom, all places you visit have such a distinct feel from one another. I can get lost in the soothing vibe of each location you journey through, and this is just the visual style. I haven't even begun to dissect the music. Enemy sprites are so distinct and have fantastic animations. Some of my favorites include the thriller-esque ghouls on the train section, and the ninja that holds up a screen and peeks from behind them. The enemy designs are great. Boss designs are also really fun and detailed. As abstract and odd as the design is, the wall boss is so striking with the over-design of the eyes that it leads to a creepy boss with a piercing gaze. I love the cartoonish take on a vampire and the shift into horror with the second-to-last Lich King boss, which might be my favorite overall design in the game. It's fantastic, and it's one of the reasons that playing through the game didn't feel stale. Except for the reuse of assets, but it is what it is, man. The characters' different attack animations were also pretty fun. There is a slight delay occasionally between the recovery animation of the enemy and your character's attack, which leads to a kind of dissonance in combat flow, but I think this is more of a combat choice in general, so I'll delve deeper into that in the combat section. The animations are fluid, and each weapon has its own attack that feels quite distinct. Spell animations are also pretty good. There were none that completely blew me away, but there is still quality animations that reflected the spell you were using. Now for the music. Of all the games I've played, I think my overall favorite soundtrack would be Final Fantasy VI. But in a tie for close second, I would rank Secret of Mana along with Chrono Trigger. That's right, I think the music is just as good, if not arguably a little better than even Chrono Trigger. So many catchy melodies that would put a smile on my face and a pep in my step. If I was ever busy and had to go do something while playing the game, I would never pause. I would let the game run in the background just so I could hear the soundtrack loop on the TV. As I was writing the script for this, I was listening to the soundtrack. I can't get enough of it. It's so pleasant and perfectly matches the tone of the game. It's carefree, it's a little silly, and most importantly, it's full of energy and rhythm. Every song feels like it knows the perfect amount of time to play and when to switch it up, so it never feels like a single melody overstays its welcome. Earworm after earworm, banger after banger. The boss theme is so epic and intense and matches the frantic rush of trying to beat a tough enemy. It all fits to a T. Nothing exemplifies this more than the Lich King boss song, which feels so creepy and different from the rest of the soundtrack in a very ominous, off-putting way that matches the atmosphere of that fight spectacularly. I must now force myself to move on from this subject, otherwise I would spend the next 20 minutes talking about why this soundtrack is perfection, so forgive the rambling. The quick menu is one of my favorite menu systems in a game like this. It feels so easy to navigate once you get the hang of it, and it feels much less intrusive than your typical pause menu. I still think it slightly detracts from the flow of combat by including magic in this, but that's a bigger issue with combat itself. As far as menus go, this feels like the optimal way in an action-oriented RPG like this, with the polymerization between visuals that are jam-packed with color and this bright lead-heavy soundtrack. The presentation of Secret of Mana does pretty much all of the heavy lifting in terms of enjoyment for this game. Sure, it can get over-sugary to the point where I feel like I'm getting fucking type 2 diabetes just from playing it, but in spurts it's king of the vibe. Absolute tonal perfection, and it's my favorite aspect of Secret of Mana. On to the progression system. It ranges from pretty meh to bad, to be honest. Level ups themselves feel fine, being your typical slight increase to stats including health, and can serve as emergency heals, which is fun. There's no customization when it comes to level ups, so that feels a little boring, but it's always nice to gain a little more health. Leveling up specific weapons by using them more is a fun idea and concept, especially by directly tying level of weapon to charge level for heavy attacks, but unfortunately this dissuades the use of swapping weapons. There is a fun variety here, and by using different weapons, you are punished for not sticking with your weapon of choice to level it as high as possible. Also, really, it's kind of unimportant. It is much more important to constantly upgrade the weapon itself with watts in the orbs you find, which provide much more in the way of damage output and viability. Equipment upgrades are also fairly standard, with merchants having new and improved equipment after every major dungeon. What is complete fucking bupkiss is the progression system for magic. If you're like me and my girlfriend, you would play as Randy, the melee man, and Prim, the healer. Well, dipshit, you fucked up, because the only viable character to truly beat endgame bosses is Papoy, the resident offensive magic user. If you do not use his magic in the earlier sections, your magic will be underpowered, and you will be forced to grind towards the end to get all magic to level 5, at least. This requires going to a section with enemies and reusing the same spell over and over and over until you upgrade every type of magic high enough, which just sucks. In theory, it is nice to reward the use of certain magic, which leads to that specific magic being more powerful. But also, in theory, it's possible for me to shit my pants right now. In theory does not always mean the best outcome. What's more important is the practicality, and the magic upgrade system lacks practicality, unless you're only using and controlling Papoy. Games like the Elder Scrolls series also employ this use of magic progression, but that is a single player experience that also does not involve pausing the menu constantly just to cast spells. This feels like a misstep, and I do not understand why magic doesn't scale with level of character or via story points that upgrades magic as a whole. Every time you unlock a new magic type by collecting the little elements, magic should just upgrade as a whole rather than just unlocking a new type. Plus, magic is so strong once you get to the end game that you feel like you're being punished for not using the wee fella, and that stinks. I want every character to feel just as useful, and that's not really the case as the game progresses, especially when many bosses are downright impossible to hit with melee and require magic towards the end. As far as story progression goes, there are some points that are just downright impossible to parse through without a guide. How in the absolute fidgety fuck am I supposed to know that the key to Golden Tower is owned by a particular NPC without any indication? Feels like it was implemented this way just to sell guides in the 90s. Final point I want to make is that save points in this game are fucking brutal. I ended up losing to the last boss my first time attempting it, the Mana Beast, and I had to restart the entire final dungeon, which included 2 mini-bosses, the Lich King end boss, and the Mana Beast itself again. Save points put hair on my chest and a gray hue to my pubes. The way NBA fans won't shut the fuck about how much harder the 90s were is the same way I feel about video games from the 90s and their save points. Oh, these whippersnappers wouldn't know nothing about losing hours worth of progress. That's my old head impression. Thanks. But I held strong and didn't use save points. Aren't I so brave? Also, there is a dummy stupid difficulty spike when you reach the Pure Lands, which fucking killed me and forced me to do an hour's worth of grinding just to meet this new jump in what was prior a fairly manageable difficulty. Fuck grinding. Now for the combat. Combat is pretty basic. My girlfriend is a cozy game connoisseur. I see your Stardew Valley and I raise you Animal Crossing? However, even she picked up the system fairly well and was on par, if not better than me, at the end. That speaks to the accessibility of the system, that my girlfriend, who does not play many video games, could intuitively understand and excel at combat. It's an easy system to pick up and fun to master. You have a bar that builds up percentages from 0 to 100 that represents your chance to hit the enemy. The addicting part is getting in that rhythm of attacking, waiting the full charge and perfectly timing your attack with that ding that represents 100%. You can also forego a regular attack and charge up a super attack that builds up slowly and stores charges depending on level of weapon and time spent charging. That's pretty much all there is to melee. You can swap weapons with a multitude, including a sword, an axe, a lance, or a ranged weapon like a whip, a bow, or a boomerang. My girlfriend preferred whip and I preferred sword. That's it. That's the system. And I know what you're thinking. Yes, this system does get old and repetitive quicker than you might imagine. Sure, there are fun things to slightly switch it up, like the introduction of healing or buffs, which I think we used like fucking twice. It just felt like a waste to use, and storing mana for healing was the better move. And offensive magic, which by the end will completely replace every other combat approach. You can get lost in this fun loop of combat, but you can also get pretty fucking tired of it. Fun fact. Secret of Mana was the first game I started on this group of 5 games, and Secret of Mana was the last game I beat. Now, this is due to a multitude of reasons, mainly being the alignment of my girlfriend and I's schedule, and the combined motivation to play more. But we had plenty of days where we could, in theory, play, but chose not to. There's a reason for that, and in my opinion, it's in the combat. It's so monotonous, and that feels crazy to say in a game that took me like roughly 20 hours to beat. I do also want to remind listeners that there is a reason for this, and that's because this game was made in 1993. It is kind of a miracle this game still semi holds up, with emphasis on semi. Me judging the simplicity of combat is like listening to Slick Rick and going, these 808s are weak as fuck. Like, no shit, Sherlock, hip-hop's just getting started. That's how I feel about this game. I know that makes absolutely no sense to 99% of you, but the 1% will understand me on a spiritual level. What keeps the combat loop sort of interesting, especially in the beginning, is the bosses. There's nothing like being snuggled up on the couch with my girlfriend, testing the limits of our relationship with the Spike boss fight. I got outright G-checked. Was cruising in this game, and Spike hit me with a, hold on, Playboy. Finally beating him felt great, and that's when combat is at its peak. Unfortunately, pretty much every boss fight after this revolved around using the offensive magic that the boss is weak to and just spamming that. This is unfortunate in 2 ways. One is every boss becomes a one-trick pony. 2 is the magic system itself within combat. I hate it, and my girlfriend hated having the flow of combat interrupted every other second because I paused the game to go to the menu and manually select the spell I wanted to use. I think it would have been 10 times better to just select spells from the menu and then that spell becomes your auto attack. This would maintain the flow of combat and keep stakes high for boss fights because you wouldn't be pausing every microsecond. Even if this idea doesn't work, I think there must be a better solution for the use of magic that doesn't involve handicapping the flow of combat, the single most important aspect. Time to shift to companions. Oh boy, have I got fucking table scraps to work with. Only 3 here, so we won't be here for long, so sit back, relax, grab some popcorn, pause the video, and take a shower because it probably is stinky. Least favorite to favorite, let's jump in. First, or last I guess, is Randy. Randy is the main man, you the main character. Randy is kind of just your typical JRPG protagonist, blank personality and boring background. Oh no, you get banished from the village. Uh-oh, who cares? Who cares? Not me certainly, and every single revelation about Randy's background had 0 impact on me. The Tree of Mana is your mom. I wasn't like, oh mother, is that you? How dearly I have missed you. I was more like, oh, that's fucking dumb. The spirit at the beginning of the game is your absentee or dead father? Huh, I didn't even remember that. And by that, I mean I didn't remember fucking asking, game. Even in combat, he's the most boring, just swings his weapon and has high health so he can do nothing for longer, I guess. I am underselling his usefulness. Against random mob enemies, he's pretty nice to have, but against the big bads, the bosses, he kinda does nothing. This comes from a Randy main. I use his character for just about the entire game, and I still have no connection to him. Even his design is pretty meh. Most washed main character of all time, if not for the mana sword. Fight me. Next is Papoy, the mana sprite. I do like Papoy's design, and unlike Randy, Papoy has some personality. Is that personality annoying? Oh, most definitely. But it is there. I do have a grudge against Papoy, however, since they were the one being controlled by the CPU, who has the tracking abilities of fucking Helen Keller. So many times my girlfriend and I were shouting at Papoy to just fucking follow us and not die, which seemed insurmountable to the CPU because their favorite activity was not following us and dying. If you controlled Papoy though, you would find the most capable and strongest combatant of them all due to their magic. But candidly, I'm fucking sick of talking about the magic system in this game. Papoy's whatever. Next. Onto my favorite, in quotations, Prim. Despite that underhanded compliment, I do have to say Prim is the closest thing to a good companion in this game. Her personality is whatever, typical stuck-up princess behavior, but her story is what ranks her the highest in my books. So often in games like this, a princess is introduced into the main character's journey to serve as a love interest for you, the lone wolf archetype of badass main character. However, that is not the case in this game. For Prim, Randy is a means to an end of rescuing her actual boyfriend Dialog, which is the true love story in this game. Randy is not the handsome main character for Prim to fawn over, she has her goal in her own love interest. This is surprisingly a really unique approach to take with her character that I think deserves a little bit of credit. Just a little bit though. Also, healing in this game is so important that her character feels really mandatory in combat. Her buffs do fuck all, but hey, healing's cool and she's nasty with a whip. Plus, my girlfriend played as her, added bonus. So that about covers it. Unbelievable levels of mid being accomplished in this section here. So, we've come to the end. Throughout the game, I've experienced some of the most frustrating dog water red rocket bullshit I have experienced to this day. But also some truly outstanding experiences that I was able to share with someone I deeply care about. Moments like this cannot be understated, and I have to remind you, games are simply so much more than any score I could ascribe them. At its lowest, this game had me seething with rage and frustration, with the only thing carrying me on being the groovy tunes in the background and the gorgeous artwork / color palette. At its best, it had me going, yeah, that was fun. So, how far can the experience of co-op gameplay and top-notch presentation take you? Approximately C tier far. I would give this game a C for check it off the list. The glittered up martyr for the action RPG hybrid. This has been Secret of Mana.
Numărul 8.
Diablo 2, or as it's pronounced in English, Diablo 2. Ah! Diablo 2 was released in 2000, the year big strong boys are born, by Blizzard, fan favorite company, and developed by Blizzard North. It was released on Windows and Mac on those old fucking hunks of trash your grandpapa owned. I personally never played Diablo 2, I only played Diablo 1 where I ran into the butcher, lost 5 times in a row without making a dent, shit and pissed myself, then deleted the game and haven't touched it since. That was until Diablo 4, where I played it non-stop for a week straight, beat it, and have not thought about it again since right now. I have a poor fat werebear rotting in a server somewhere. There are roughly 2 versions of this game, Classic Diablo 2 and Diablo 2 Resurrected, which released on a multitude of platforms, and I played the latter. I did apply the classic graphic filter to it because I just preferred it this way. From everything I've seen, people widely agree that Diablo 2 Resurrected is a great way to play Diablo 2, at least in the modern age, with the only disagreement being the accuracy of the classic filter, which I don't really care about. It matches the general vibe and that's good enough for me. So, let's dive into Diablo 2. To state up front, playing Diablo 2 for the story is like watching the Super Bowl for the plot. I know some people really do love the plot of Diablo 2, and I can admit I enjoyed it. It just never felt like the story was what was propelling me forward, but rather an instrument that led to the gameplay itself. For a quick synopsis, Diablo 2 takes place right after the events of Diablo 1. All you need to know from Diablo 1 is that the hero beat Diablo, the big bad, aka Lucifer, Satan, Beelzebub, Blizzard Entertainment, whatever you want to call the Lord of Hell. In this story, the previous game's hero has become corrupted and is traveling the lands releasing demons into the world with the end goal of freeing Diablo. Our job is to chase him and stop him. Spoiler, the villain of the game is Diablo, in case the fucking title didn't give it away, so we are unsuccessful. And Diablo is raised and we have to stop him. In the original Diablo 2, this is where the story roughly ends, but with the expansion Lord of Destruction, we have to go after the last primeval ball and stop him from destroying the world. Basic stuff that mainly serves as a reason to fight demons, bad guys, and to explore a variety of different locations, which I'm on board with. Feel bad for cutting this section so short, but that really is the gist of it. Not much to comment on. I will say I enjoyed the villains that popped up throughout, but again, I enjoyed them due to their designs and the act of fighting them, not really the story. I do like the rat race of it all, trying to chase after the mysterious stranger who is causing havoc, but there just really isn't too much story to experience. Ball, the villain of the expansion, is really enjoyable and is built up to be a creepy fucking rat bastard, so credit there. I also like the CGI that is used for the big scenes of exposition. Definitely super dated, but in a very aesthetic early 2000s way that's charming to me. Sort of like Monster House. It's so uncanny that it makes it even creepier almost. Plus, these cutscenes nail the atmosphere of the game itself, so these scenes were always a pleasant little surprise. Again, the story isn't lacking in plot per se, as what's there is pretty good and intriguing, it's definitely not the main highlight nor focus of Diablo 2. So yeah, on to the presentation I suppose. I adore the presentation of Diablo 2. The visuals along with the music absolutely nails this gothic vibe that Diablo is so notable for. It also carries this tonally dark feeling throughout a multitude of environments. I mean, we're in a fucking desert at one point that feels just as gothic as the old abandoned churches we explore. I think this is greatly helped by the fantastic soundtrack playing throughout. From the iconic Diablo chords being strummed string by string in Tristram, to the lead guitar peeking through the forest soundtrack, all of it fits so snugly with the vibe that the visuals are giving off. It's determined while being despondent, perfectly imitating the struggle your character may be facing. It's great. My only gripes lay with the desert soundtrack, which can only be described as Arab man near sanded Hollywood type beat. As for the visuals, yeah, they are a little dated and pixely, but I love the rugged look of it. It adds a shadowy dark haze to the environment. It makes you feel truly alone as you battle against hordes upon hordes of demons. Also, if you're not a fan of this, if you're playing on Resurrected, you can always just change it to the modern graphics. The layout is also so iconic that it set the framework for all ARPGs to come, with that flask of blue representing mana and the flask of red representing health. The sound design is also just as important to the gameplay as the soundtrack. The clink of coins that drop after killing an enemy or the swoosh of an item being dropped leads to a fun call and response between killing enemies and being rewarded. The designs of the creatures you fight are also top notch. They don't feel one-dimensional, and it seems like every time you start to get tired of an enemy design, a new one appears to shake things up. Don't even get me started on the world bosses because holy shit, they all look so good. Their design is top notch, and seeing some of these fuckers just appear in a room you enter is downright scarring. Ever since that fucking red-skinned butcher bitch in Diablo 1 pants me, I've suffered from Diablo PTSD. This condition occurs when you enter a room slightly unprepared and get surprised by a sin against God himself. In this game, it was Andariel who shook me to my core and served as the first time to dial in moment in Diablo 2. All of the world bosses serve as appropriate finishes to the world, and they are all unique in their look and feel. A slight problem I do have with the presentation is the necessity of the minimap. Navigating these areas without it is damn near impossible, but having it up takes away from the immersion of the environments. All being said, you do become kind of numb to its existence, but it's still somewhat noticeable. Overall, the beauty of Diablo 2 comes in from not a single one of these aspects I've listed, but rather how they all serve as building blocks to the entire structure. The music builds up the visuals, which builds up the tone, which builds up your immersion, which builds up the fun of playing Diablo 2. And we have not even gotten to the best part yet, the progression. The single most important and defining trait of the ARPG genre. If you don't have a fun character growth curve, then your game is cooked. So, is this turkey raw or nah? I'm actually fucking stupid. For real. This game's progression system is the best I've experienced. Working your way through that tree feels so rewarding and fun. Every single level up felt like a new opportunity to explore the skill tree, and this loop kept me so hooked. Creating a build and seeing it come together feels fantastic, and on top of this, every single character has their own unique skill tree which is filled with its own goodies. Just take my class I chose, Necromancer for example. Just from this one class I could do a corpse explosion build, a bone build with a bone spear, a poison build where I use curses and poison attacks, or do what I did and fully invest in summoning your army of fucking
spooky, scary skeletons.
Call me fucking Paul Mescal the way I raise a boner. This is just one class too. The classes available in Diablo 2 are Amazon, Assassin, Necromancer, Barbarian, Paladin, Sorceress, and finally Druid. Each fully decked out with their own unique skill trees, and every single one being a valid option with multiple builds. To this day, arguments rage on about which class is the most fun to play. That's just the beginning though. As that fat bastard Biggie said, "Give me the loot! Give me the loot!" The loot progression and loot systems are so addicting. There's just like, there's this thing, yeah, it's gambling. It's 100% just gambling.
Let's go gambling! Aw, dang it! Aw, dang it! Aw, dang it! Aw, dang it! Aw, dang it!
Yeah, it's slots. Except instead of money, you're using valuable seconds of your life. But hey, I'm native. I can't help it. Casinos are in my blood. Getting a good loot drop or seeing the yellow font is the closest thing we have developed to a safe form of fentanyl. It's so mind-numbingly transfixing. I did carefully pick my words because no doubt, 90% of this game is mindless chugging. There are some moments where you have to dial in, but for a large majority, it's kind of just going through the motions. But when the motions look this sexy, why not, baby? Is that previous statement super biased and unexplainable? Yes. Is there a second part to that statement? No. However, any enemy could in theory drop that perfect item you need to continually chase that high, so no encounter feels pointless. Items themselves usually just lead to flat increases in stats or skill levels, but the items you get feel unique because there's so many classes with so many builds that acquiring the item you need that perfectly matches your build is more difficult than you might imagine. It's not just replacing gear enemy after enemy, drop after drop. It's seeing the drop and finding out that it applies to your specific build that leads to the serotonin release. It's downright scary how addicting this game can become. The Runes Word system also serves as its own equipment progression system. By sliding weapons and inserting specific runes into weapons, you can combine them to create special named weapons that are super powerful, like Malice the Scythe that I created and gave to my follower. This just adds another piece of loot that you are on the hunt for and leads to checking every room to see if you can create the perfect rune enchanted piece of equipment that fits your build. In another life, I would currently be shoving bugles down my gullet and playing this like it was a 9 to 5, clocking in like my child's livelihood depends on it. But alas, fate be a cruel mistress, and that is not the world I exist in. Until then, I will reminisce on the time my ADHD brain spent suckling on that dopamine tit known as Diablo 2. Plus, once you have beat the game, oh baby, you're just getting started. From here, you can play on a loop, increasing difficulty perpetually in order to get the best items and gear possible, and become fully stocked up as the perfect character. According to my one playthrough rules, I had to stop myself after I beat it, but let me tell you, it was a difficult decision, especially with the pacing of this game that is so efficient. It feels like it's over in the blink of an eye, and it keeps you hooked every second. I felt like a fucking junkie the way I was scratching my arm, craving the world of Diablo 2 whenever I wasn't playing. Admittedly, on paper, this endless loop should be something I lose interest in rather quickly, but the way all these different progression systems mingle leads to a gaming experience unmatched. But what's a progression system if there is not a fun combat system to match? So, how is combat? Well, if you're bad at clicking, then fucking good luck, Chuck. In all seriousness, you will be clicking. A lot. What keeps this combat system fresh is the skills you are available to deploy. Throughout a single zone, you will be swapping between your regular attacking and using your variety of skills you unlock through the tree in a back and forth manner that seemingly never gets tiring. Remember in Planescape Torment where I said you had to mentally prepare yourself whenever you sat down to play it? Diablo 2 is the opposite, with the combat and looting system being perfect for spurts of gameplay. Have an hour to kill after work? Hop right in, champ. You wake up a bit earlier than you normally do? Sell your soul to Blizzard and get the fuck in here, pal. This game seemed to fly by due to the ease of access of gameplay, and the combat perfectly reflects this. At first it's a little basic, with the main gist revolving around manually attacking, but by the Hell Dungeon, your screen is filled with enemies and you're blasting skills left and right. For my Necromancer, this flip-flop between summoning Smellingtons and Golems, to abusing corpse explosions to do massive damage. Let me be the first to tell you. Well, not the first. Let me be the umpteenth YouTuber to tell you. Necromancer is the way to go. Running around with my own personal boner brigade is one of the most satisfying combat experiences to date. my bony henchmen slapping down demons for me made me feel like the fucking Dawn, huh? I feel like the fucking belly of the ball, huh? I mean, imagine being a fucking demon in Diablo 2 and the last thing you see and hear before you respawn at the pearly gates is this. The clay golem is also a day one. Just shouts out straight up. He's just as useful the first time you use him as the last time. My only complaint with Necromancer is there are times he feels a little too strong. Like, the skill Decrepify nullifies bosses. With you in the Boner Battalion, it's like a 10v1 except the one is stuck moving as though he's underwater. So, a little unfair, but also get fucked, bozo. Most of the check your privilege, brother bosses were pretty handily dealt with by me and my crowd of cadavers. I absolutely butt-blasted Duriel, who is supposed to be the hardest difficulty spike in the game. Not to brag or anything. The Necromancer Summoner is balanced by the fact that without corpses, he is absolutely useless, as his two main abilities for the Summoner build being Corpse Explosion, which explodes corpses, and Raise Skeleton, which requires corpses to raise. If you're fighting a boss and you lose your minions, you are butt naked at senior prom, fully exposed. This rarely happened, but when it did, you fucking smelt what the rock was cooking, brother. It is suffice to say that the combat is carried by the skills you unlock, but even increases in single skill levels felt impactful and directly led to combat feeling more intense and fun to play. Raising levels on Raise Skeleton means your army could grow, so there were more characters on screen, leading to a more hectic battleground. The fusion dance that progression and combat do with one another is the main reason Diablo as a franchise is so engaging, and Diablo 2 is the absolute peak of this. Now for the companions. Emilio, oh mi amor. Yep, there are none. I contemplated what to do to fill out this section because even just talking about characters would be pretty shallow. I mean, there's Deckard Cain, but that's about it. Every other NPC is fairly minor and just serves as quest givers with barely any significance or importance to the plot. So am I just gonna skip a section? Well, sit down and relax, Jimbo, because that's not the case. So instead, I needed to devise an alternate section for games such as Diablo 2 that focus mainly on combat and don't involve written companions. Games like the Soulsborne series perfectly fit into this category as well. So I plotted, I schemed, and I took a playbook from the Souls Community Book of Plays and decided I would rank games bosses if they met the criteria of having no companions or in-depth developed characters. So basically this game in the Soul series. That's right, I'm just pushing the envelope over here. There are many mini-bosses in Diablo 2, so instead I decided to focus on the 5 world bosses for each act. Okay, let's jump in. In last place is Mephisto. Mephisto your mamo. Nice. Understand that as world tiers increase, he gets significantly harder, but in normal tier he is piss easy. Absolutely slapped his bitch ass down before we even really got going. His inclusion in the plot is also kind of funny because we basically spawn camp him and kill him almost immediately once he gets revived. This fight is not that memorable and that's why he ranks at the bottom. Next up is Duriel. Normal tier Duriel is kind of labeled as a showstopper and many claim he's the hardest boss in the game, but I just did not get this experience. His design is up there with my favorite in the game, but like the bug he is, we stepped on him with our size 10.5 Doc Martens. Did him absolutely dirty. Reaching the Olympic podium, in third place we have Indariel. She fucking jump scared me hard in that fucking room and in turn emptied my bladder. She is the first act boss you come across and she's fairly difficult. None of these bosses in normal tier really gave me much None of these bosses in normal tier really gave me much difficulty, except for number 1. True. But Indariel definitely made me lock in and stop dicking around. It was the first point in the game where all my summons died, so I was frantically running around the room like a chicken with my head cut off, scrounging for bodies to resurrect. Once I calmed down from my manic, fear-induced panic, I took care of her fairly well, but that initial confrontation is still a highlight for me from this game. I also like her involvement in the first act, with her corrupting the rogues from the first game. It's a neat little tie-in. The runner-up is Baal, this little fucking piggy of a creature. I think Baal probably has the best characterization of any of the bosses, and every cutscene he is in feels creepy and disturbing. He comes off as a force to be reckoned with, and it was probably the best implementation of villain buildup in this game. Unfortunately, his boss fight, like the others, did not exactly challenge me, and I pretty much steamrolled him. And in first place, guys, you're not gonna fucking believe this, guys, it's Diablo. The Diablo boss is great, but I mean, come on, it's fucking Diablo. What did you expect? The fucking point of the game is to kill Diablo, so you better nail that. And it does. I mean, you can't call your main character Fat Cock McGee and later show an upskirt to reveal he has a micro-wiener. The same way you can't call your game Diablo 2 Diablo 2 Furious and not nail this boss. Luckily it does, and it's truly a memorable fight. Set on top of a platform above lava, everything about the locale feels right for this final fight against Diablo in hell. Just you and Diablo, mano-y-mano. Well, Diablo versus me and my 10 skeletons and my golem and oh mi amore Emilio. But you get the gist. This motherfucker squad wiped me, looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Booyah," and sent me back to camp. He took me about 3 tries, and that's with stacking damage from previous attempts. He's tough but rewarding and a perfect way to end this fantastic journey. Except for the expansion, but ignore that for the sake of this line. So we've done it. We have finally added the Diablo 2 notch to our belt, and I gotta say, it was fantastic. So often when talking about the forefather of an entire genre, the games feel dated and janky to play. I did not feel that once with this game. This feels just as fresh in 2024 as it did when it came out in 2000. It has aged like a fine Cabernet. In the scope of Diablo 2 clones, to this day no single ARPG has been able to take that crown away from the predecessor, and it still sits firmly atop the head of Diablo 2. Even the components with less focus, like the story, are still super memorable, and the blitzkrieg pacing of this game leads to one of the most enduring experiences I've had the pleasure of playing. Just talking about this game gives me the itch to start up Nightmare mode and continue where I left off, but I'll have to save that for another day. I'm going to give Diablo 2 an A+. I wish I was the Sigma brain that enjoys Planescape more because of the vast amount of wrinklage on my brain and the philosophical nature of Planescape that caused me to go, indubitably. But I like what I like. Diablo 2 is fantastic, and I'd probably rate it below Final Fantasy VI, but it definitely belongs in the same grade. How about them fucking apples?
Broj 9.
Vagrant Story. Vagrant Story is an action RPG that was released for the PlayStation 1 by Square in 2000, apparently a great year for video games. It was re-released by Square Enix for PlayStation 3 and the portable systems, but it was essentially just a port, no in-depth changes. We will be talking about the PlayStation 1 version in all of its polygonal glory. This is not my first outright time playing this game. I played it in college up to the point where you beat the Minotaur and got lost in the crypts and just gave up. Partially coming from the fact that I definitely should have been studying rather than exploring Le Monde, so I'll take that one on the chin. Yeah, I'm absolutely awful about finishing games, no need to tell me, but I'm learning and getting better, okay? I'm a madman, a freakazoid, I can't be left to my own devices or I'd never finish a fucking game. I'm insane-o. Transitioning, I want us all to step back and realize this is now the 4th Square game in the top 10, which is absolutely mental. What's even more bananas is the fact that so far they've all arguably been deserved. Some more so than others, but still. So, can Vagrant Story live up to the hype? Let's find out. The story. If you, like me, started this game by clicking the new game option that's on the main menu, pre-highlighted, then you have already fucked up, stupid! Isn't it obvious that to get crucial background information on the starting events of the game, you're actually supposed to sit around twiddling your toes, waiting for the opening cutscene to start playing after 30 seconds of inactivity on the main menu? Oh Jesus, this is gonna be a brutal game, isn't it? We are then introduced to our main protagonist, Ashley Riot, who drops the hardest line in the game. I am the reinforcements. Anyways, what we ascertain from this vital scene that's hidden for some reason is that Ashley is a risk breaker, an agent, who has been sent on a mission by the VKP, an organization known as the Valyrian Knights of Peace, to save the Duke's son from a crazy cult led by our villain slash friend slash anti-hero, Sydney Lostorot, I think, who has taken over the Duke's manor. Our other main villain, Guildenstern, is also chasing Sydney, but his reasons are vastly different. So we are slapped cold turkey into the air fryer, and within minutes we're fighting a literal dragon in the opening scene. This story has lots of moving parts and abstract concepts, so I'll just mention the basics, otherwise this section would comprise the entire video. Links in the description to hear more in-depth story breakdowns. This game has been described as medieval Gear Solid. Whoever thought up that description probably jerked themselves raw for an entire day. And I feel like this is an apt description. So, we learn that Leomon, the city that we're currently in, is a special zone that has powers that enable the spawn of undead and mythological creatures. We also learn that Guildenstern is interested in Sydney to acquire his immortality for the quote-unquote cardinal he is working for. Also, we learn from Sydney, who is committing psychological warfare on Ashley, that Ashley was responsible for his own family's death. But this may very well be gaslighting, as we hear a different version of events later on. We never really get clarification on this, and it's part of the reason I love the story, but slow down Nelly, we still got a little bit more to get through. As the story progresses, we learn that the city itself is a grand grimoire that holds immense power that can only be unlocked by a key known as Bloodsin. This key happens to be the giant tramp stamp on Sydney's back, and eventually Guildenstern acquires the symbol by ripping it off Sydney. We then have to fight a juiced up Guildenstern who killed his lover as a form of sacrifice as the final boss. We then get a very vague scene that implies Ashley is one piece in a larger puzzle, and the game abruptly ends. Holy shit, I feel like I just had a frenzied manic moment trying to explain this plot. What I find astonishing about all this is how digestible it comes off during the game. Sure, my explanation sounded like pure psychosis, but the game actually does a decent job explaining what's happening, but also leaving some elements purposefully vague. These vague elements add to the story because we are put in Ashley's shoes, unsure of who to trust, whose story to believe. Trying to parse out who's playing who and what's going on is brilliant. It's a mature, cerebral tale that treats its audience like adults and doesn't baby you with information. It never feels like it gets in its own way, and I respect any game that can balance a very confusing plot with a multitude of moving elements without going full schizo. The villains are also fairly well done. Again, there's two sides that are opposing you, and half the fun is figuring out whose interests you most align with. Sure, Sydney is playing you, but he doesn't seem to be evil despite capturing her partner. And then there's Guildenstern, who acts psychotic but never fully evil. We just see glimpses of his hunger for power. All of this reaches boiling point at the Grand Cathedral with an amazing climax. My biggest complaint is the swift conclusion that brushes far too much under the rug and just ends. I feel like I need to donate to a fucking GoFundMe to get the rest of this game, but it never comes. It's just over after a confusing scene that feels like it's setting up something that never came. It's unfortunate, but I still do love the story, and it's paramount to the critical success that Vagrant Story enjoys. Next is presentation. Why do all the characters dress like slutty little whores? The audacity of Ashley to trounce around showing off those trampish delts is just unbecoming. In all seriousness, the drip of this game is immaculate. I don't know what the inspiration is, I can't place what it's supposed to be referencing, but it is so fantastic. What's even more fantastic, however, are these graphics. God damn it, it looks so unbelievably good, especially considering the hardware it's on. I mean, these graphics still have their own charm to this day, and that's saying something considering that this is running on a PlayStation 1. I have no clue how they were able to pull this off. It's mind-blowing. Character designs are perfect. Each character feels distinct and recognizable without coming off as too ridiculous or goofy. For as conceptual as the plot is, it feels very grounded in reality, and the characters reflect this, except for Sydney's like metal claws. When I say grounded, I obviously don't mean magic is realistic or whatever, but there was never elements where I was like, this is just exuberantly fantastical. It all felt plausible in the world that was built. Well, maybe besides the final boss turning into a butterfly, but for the most part. Enemy designs weren't bad, but what was awful is the constant reuse of designs. I get that this is necessary in many games, but also it's just so blatantly obvious in Vagrant Story that it's a little insulting. I don't need a perfectly new handcrafted boss for every fight, but also I don't need to fight a reused crab boss in the final dungeon. The soundtrack is pretty good. All the accompanying themes felt right, and there were some memorable moments, but after putting the game down for so long, I can only remember like a couple pieces that stuck with me. It all flowed well when playing, I just personally wouldn't rank it as one of my favorites. Battle themes were super intense though, so props to that. I also have to slightly complain about how sick of the environments I would get. yellow tunnel after yellow tunnel. It felt super repetitive. Environments didn't really stick out, and towards the end where you could teleport, I had no clue which locations were which because they all blended together in my mind. The slight reprieves we got were also some of the worst locations, like Snowfly Forest, which is covered in this annoying ass fog. Sure, it gives off spooky undead city, but also give me something more that's not entirely bland. I love the dark Undercity area, and more environments like that would have been greatly appreciated. Also, in a game like this, with the camera controls we have, why in the absolute fuck are we doing any platform? Are you out of your goddamn mind, Square? What an insane idea to try to implement. The platforming and the box puzzle parts of this game were such a fucking drag, and easily one of the worst parts. One of. Lastly is the confusing layout of the map. I got so lost so frequently, it's astounding. There's no overall map that connects different sections, so pre-fast travel I would get so lost that it isn't funny. And nothing is worse than getting lost in this game because that means the respawning of enemies and trudging through combat. Now for progression. I actually thought the equipment management aspect of this game was fantastic. You could mix any blade with any hilt to create and name your own weapons, which I think is a nifty little idea that I have not seen elsewhere. Every single weapon I got to create and name felt personal and memorable because I was the one who created the specific combination. I swear I used my trusty little stabby for like half the game. I also like fusing different weapons together to try and get better overall pieces of equipment. It felt Persona-ish and it was my favorite system to interact with. The only thing that really sucked is the stupid inventory limits that made no logical sense. Why is it limited? For realism? Oh yeah, because it was definitely believable that I could have 8 swords up my fucking ass, but I'll be goddamned if I can fit a 9th. If it's for technical limitations, well that sounds like a bunch of fucking hoopla to me. Also, Ashley himself never really felt like his character progresses. I know after every boss you unlock a new grimoire which contains a new spell, but that's it. Every other method of progression is exclusively tied to the gear and weapons you find, and it can get a little shaky. The equipment curve is so jagged, and there are definitive points where the weapons you found and unlocked are far behind enemy levels, so you're slapping bosses with your wet noodle of a weapon which does like fucking 5 damage. This led some fights to genuinely taking about 20 minutes. Looking at you, Rosencrantz. Also, the real lack of tutorials suck. I know that there's a glossary, but it's such a boring way to relay vital information to the enjoyment of the game, and it doesn't have to be anything crazy, but at least try to teach me the basics without saying tough tits. Also, fuck the lettering system. It makes legitimately zero fucking sense. It's unintuitive, hogwash, and pee-pee-brained. Save points were fine, they felt fairly spread out, so no complaints there. Nothing too egregious. Items, however, felt too far and in between. There's a fine balance between too many items and not enough, and this game definitely lacks in items a little bit. Towards the end, in an effort to not waste items, which would become desperately needed for the end game, I would just sit around playing fucking Sudoku on my phone, waiting for Ashley to cool down and have his wrist levels go down and his health go up. And I just wish we were given more items so this wouldn't have happened. Also, as far as progressing the story, there is so much backtracking. Some of it is reasonable and makes sense, but a lot of it feels completely stupid, which would be impossible to figure out if you did not have a guide telling you where to go or how to fucking get there. Combat. Fucking combat. The combat system is unique real-time with pause, like the Fallout VAT system where time slows down and you are given the option to target different parts of the enemy. I have no problem with this core combat system and I actually think it's a pretty fun idea. However, this is the most 10,000 IQ convoluted, complicated combat system known to man. Let me give you a quick rundown of how the system works, shall we? This is the checklist you need to run down for your combat analysis to figure out how to approach an encounter. What tier of weapon do you have? There's bronze, iron, Hagain, silver, and Damascus. Make sure to have the highest tier of weapon available or you won't be doing any damage to new enemies. What type of damage does your weapon do? Each enemy has an affinity system that is weak to a certain type of damage, so make sure you have at least one edged, one piercing, and one crushing with any type of weapon being able to cover any type of damage. Is your weapon one-handed or two-handed? Two-handers do more damage at the cost of losing your shield and defense. What weapon grip do you have assembled? You want the grip with the best affinity, for like edged, piercing, or crushing, for the blade that it is attached to while simultaneously offering the most gem slots. Speaking of gem slots, what gems are you using? You will have to equip and unequip gems that boost separate affinities so they can best handle and cover the affinity weaknesses of your specific enemy. Some gems boost elemental, some boost type, some boost strength. What elemental affinity does your weapon itself have? It can cover air, water, earth, fire, and water, but these can be buffed with certain spells, but you can only have one buff at a time, so this is actually really important. What monster type affinity does your weapon have? You need to have weapons that cover each type, including human, beast, undead, phantom, dragon, and evil. To boost your affinity, you need to fight monsters of the type you want to boost, but this inversely affects another monster type, which lowers if you fight that opposite type. So you can lose the affinity while gaining a different type of affinity. Also, have you used the weapon enough to boost its darkness level? If not, damage is pathetic, but also it wears down your weapon. And if you repair your weapon, you lose the darkness level and that boost in strength. Also, have you buffed with Hercules and Protation to ensure you do a little more than 5 damage? But make sure if you're one-handing, your weapon has opposite damage type for your enemy, but your shield has to be the same type. Oh, and then there's the battle itself, where you can combo your attacks by timing attacks perfectly, but comboing raises your risk, which increases damage but lowers accuracy, so if this gets too high, you can't hit water if you fell out of a boat. Did I mention there are 4 different combo attacks you can swap in and out? Also, are you targeting the right body part? Different enemies have different percentage to hit, and specific weaknesses, so make sure you're hitting the weak point, which the game does not tell you. Haven't got the hang of it all? Well, kick rocks, scrub. This is legitimately mind-melting shit. Let me use the gremlin enemy to explain a little bit, so maybe we can work through this together. These little creatures make no goddamn fucking butt-fuck, motherfuck, suck my nut, clusterfuck of any semblance of a sense. If there was no internet, I would currently be convulsing on the floor with an aneurysm. These little critters can silence you, heal themselves, and have armor, and the only way to beat them is to increase water infinity with an H-level weapon. Equip Undying Gem, either use Crushing or Piercing, not edged, with a Hercules buff if you are not silenced, just to do a fair modicum of damage that's not single digit. If you are missing a single one of these things, you will do single digit damage. This is an endgame common enemy. Do what? Oh yeah, and did I mention I would have no idea about any of this if not for the internet? Sure, there's the spell Analyze, but that gives you cursory information, and there's a good chance you won't have the correct weapon prepared to deal with the threat at all, so all it really does is tell you what you're missing. You have to look up what to do for like every fucking enemy. It's so annoying. To figure it out on your own, you're either plucking away with single digit combat numbers, which can take forever, or you're frantically swapping through weapons to see which can do the most damage, because affinity sure as fuck doesn't always help. So many times I was like, darn, I guess I don't have the correct crushing light affinity demon focused weapon, so now this boss fight is gonna take 30 minutes. Shucks, I guess. This is compounded by the fact you have very limited amount of weapons you can carry at a given time. All of the explanations I have given also are just nowhere to be found in game, except if you're lucky enough to find the glossary, which gives a general gist to combat. Eventually, over the length of the game, you start to kind of get it, but even then, just because you understand the system does not make it any less tedious. The pinnacle of bullshit is just how annoying it is to swap between weapons for every different enemy type. If there was like some quick menu or button assignments to switch weapon sets, this would make combat so much faster, but it's just not there. You have to navigate the menu system whenever you want to change weapons, which is for about every single enemy. Magic also is pretty useless except for the buffs, which are essential. I know there are some enemies that are super weak to certain elements, but it's better to just equip an elemental gem rather than waste MP on a spell. You know a combat system is janky when even the fucking internet can't agree on what's most important to increase for your weapons. I saw multiple guides telling me completely opposite affinities I needed to raise. Like I said, eventually combat gets a little better, but you have to go through so much bullshit just to get to this point, and honestly, I don't know if it's worth it. Bosses are genuinely not fun and can take so long to beat that I just space out. Also, what the fuck is the combat system? This isn't fucking Dance Dance Revolution. Why is it like a timing minigame when there is already a risk-reward case? Stupid. Bosses also have like no connection to the plot whatsoever except for a couple, which isn't in of itself a detriment. There are just so many useless bosses that you have to fight over and over that it becomes annoying. The final boss goes stupid hard though. The flying around thing is whack as fuck and the Bloodsin move is donkey wiener, but it's still a tough, memorable fight. All of this to say, it's a shame how the combat turned out because there are ideas here that are genuinely wonderful and unique, which I haven't seen replicated in any other game. I think these ideas just needed to be reined in and expanded upon a little bit to trim the excess fat that this game's combat system is loaded with. There are many parts where I was just genuinely not having a good time, and that's a bummer, especially when combat makes up so much of the game. You might say, well, this is the most unique combat system of any game, to which I'd say, so true, Daddy, so proud of you. Good ideas do not a combat system make, but rather the execution of good ideas is what makes a fun, engaging combat system. Lots of good ideas here for sure, I just think it gets in its own way far too often. Did any of that make sense? I sure hope so. Now on to the companions. There are none. Wow, I really killed it by determining my layout of analysis in the very first video, unaware of how many fucking RPGs just don't have companions. I'm a fucking genius, dude. Oh, neither does the next game? Awesome! Fuck yeah! At least with this game, we have some pretty in-depth characters, so I'll just talk about our cast in no particular order. First up is Calo Merlos, the chick. Her character is so utterly useless, we learn pretty much nothing about her, and she serves as nothing but an instrument to progress the plot. She's just here to fart out some exposition using her telepathy to tell us things about Sydney that we would have no other way of knowing. That's also kind of surprising because she's like on the cover and gets barely any development. I don't know why. Next up is the main man, Ashley himself. He's such a cool protagonist. I have no way of defending this claim, I just like his character design. I love the uncertainty about his past and the unshaken motivation to keep moving regardless of what comes up. I just enjoy the character. I don't know how to better describe it. Sydney is possibly the most complex of all the cast. I love his interactions and the scheming he does behind the scenes. I constantly feel like I'm playing keep up just to stay on track with Sydney, and the bonds he makes with other characters in the game opens our eyes to his true self. This is especially true about his relationship with Hardin. He also has this like anti-hero vibe about him, and to this day I'm not sure if he's a good guy or not. He's complex, layered, and one of the most memorable side characters in the RPG genre, especially considering we never even fight him himself. Plus, his design goes stupid. Rosencrantz is such an interesting character, and the fact that I have no fucking clue what his motivations are. He's another up-in-the-air character who at least gives Ashley a different viewpoint to consider, so he's not being gaslit girl-bossed completely by Sydney, but alas, we don't know if we can trust Rosencrantz, so who fucking knows. His hunger for power comes from a completely different place than Guildenstern, so he serves as a fun foil for what Ashley could have been, if not for circumstances. Finally, I wanted to wrap this section up with Samantha and Guildenstern. I feel like Samantha is the most tragic character in the game. In reality, she really does nothing wrong except for putting her faith in the wrong man. And even then, she still comes off as a reasonable, caring person. Guildenstern is an okay villain. He kind of serves as the twist to Big Bad, as most people would assume we would fight Sydney at the end, so this transversal of expectations is kind of exciting. The boss fight is one of my favorite final bosses, and his endgame design is so sick. The fight itself is a bitch and a half, but after a couple of tries, I finally got the hang of what to do. So, that's been Vagrant Story. This game too often gets lauded for having lots of ideas. I think this is dumb. Ted Kaczynski had lots of ideas, okay? That means fuck all. What I do have to agree with is the outright uniqueness of Vagrant Story. I've played my fair share of games, and there truly is nothing like this on the market. Sure, there may be games that incorporate bits and pieces, but none with the balls to tackle it all. But on the other hand, there is a beauty in being able to leave some ideas on the cutting room floor. This game feels like Nirvana's Bleach. There's gonna be a banger here someday, but just maybe not this one. I think many people jerk this game off too much for having lots of cool systems, but in my opinion, it's just a wee bit unfocused in design. There were moments I genuinely was not having a good time. Yet, during my playthrough of the game, my computer broke down and I had to take it into a repair shop. During this time, I found myself missing Vagrant Story. My PlayStation is what broke down and I had to get fixed because that's what I played this on. Sorry, a misspeak. And during that repair time, it had me wondering, is this Stockholm Syndrome? Say what I will, this game did make me passionate and had me returning time and time again, so I feel like that says more than anything I could articulate. It feels like a giant what-if game, and if it had some more time in the oven, I believe we could have gotten a true masterpiece on par with the top-tier Final Fantasy games. Of all the games I've ranked, this grade is the one I most flip-flopped on, but I think I finally settled on a score. I'm going to give Vagrant Story a B. I can't in good faith say I completely recommend this game to anyone and everyone, but if anything I've said caused you to perk your little ears up, then I would recommend checking this out and giving it a try, at the very least. Now, on to the last game for this video.
Numer 10.
The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. Guys, it's like 1:28 in the morning, I can't sleep, so I figured I'd do some recording, so if I sound a little sleepy, that's my bad. The The Witcher 3 is an action role-playing game developed and published by Polish studio CG Projekt Red in 2015. I know that's not how it's pronounced, and it's technically some other Slavic-ass name, but I'm an American, I'm done. Tee-hee! Over the past 9 years that this game has been out, it has undergone this weird whiplash from being labeled the best game ever made to this thing sucks my fucking furry balls, so I've been meaning to check this one out and replay it now that I've gotten a few more years under me. I first played this back in high school where I decided this was my favorite RPG, and I would say The Witcher 3 is what got me into the more fantasy-based role-playing games. I used to play games like Call of Duty and Rainbow Six Siege exclusively, and The Witcher 3 got me into RPGs in general. However, I am a little scared to play this because it was my favorite in high school, and let's just say I had a lot of dumb opinions in high school. What do you know? Fallout 4 is not the best game ever made. I played the pretty much one and only version of The Witcher 3, also known as the Complete Edition, which includes all DLC in the next-gen graphical update. I played a mixture on PC and some on the Steam Deck, which is actually a super fun and convenient way to play this one. I would highly recommend, but all recorded footage is on PC. Also important to note, this is the third entry in a series, and I have never played the previous games or read the books they're all based off. But don't even worry, I've seen like 2 episodes of the Netflix series, so I'm quite possibly an expert. So, has The Witcher 3 stood the test of time since my high school days? Let's find out. First off is the story. I just want to say, isn't it so cool how they developed an entire side game and story to go along with the main game Gwent? Actually, let me get the bad out of the way before I start going full sycophant for this game's writing. The main story of this game pales in comparison to all the side content there is to experience. This wouldn't normally be too bothersome, but the main story has such an urgent feel to it that it feels unrealistic that Geralt would not be Iron Giant fucking red-eye focused on finding Ciri. It's always frustrating when games put extreme importance and urgency on the main plot, which in turn takes away from the fun of exploring the world. Also, the main plot is pretty meh anyways, post Bloody Baron at least. So instead of tiptoeing around plot elements, let's give a quick synopsis. You play as Geralt, the stoic, white-haired, buff and sexy witcher. First pit stop, has absolutely no impact on anything, but why do people in the world always refer to him as like an ugly freak? He is like objectively a good-looking person, especially compared to all the disgusting emaciated peasants around him. And he also gets ungodly amounts of play from the ladies, which kinda proves I'm right here. Again, no relevance, but whenever this came up, I thought it was kind of funny. A Witcher is a fancy name for a monster hunter in this universe, and they are defined by the white hair and cat-like eyes that come from the mutations that they have to undergo to become a Witcher. We start the journey looking for Yennefer, the long-lost lover of Geralt. Oh, did I mention Geralt had amnesia and forgot about Yennefer until the events of the last game? Skipping over that, we finally meet up with Yennefer and follow her to the Emperor of Nilfgaard, a nation that is currently invading the north part of the continent. Another term for the world of The Witcher. He is quite the prick, but genuinely one of my favorite characters in the story, where he requests us to find his daughter Ciri, who also happens to be Geralt's adopted daughter. She has disappeared and thus starts the main grab of the game. We need to rescue Ciri. This leads us to exploring every corner of the world and following leads as they come along, from the Bloody Baron, to Novigrad, to Skellige, to the Witcher stronghold Kaer Morhen, and finally, to Ciri. Along the way, picking up side story after side story after side story. It is truly unreal the ratio of quality, well-written side stories to pointless fetch quests that are in this game. It has to be like 99% to 1 in favor of the in-depth quests. Also important to note, we find out that an ancient evil known as the Wild Hunt is also after Ciri, so it becomes a race to find her before they do. This is where our main villain Eredin comes from, who is pretty disappointing as a villain. Gets no real development except a bit of exposition towards the end, and the only real thing he has going for him is some sick fucking armor. And don't get me wrong, that armor is fucking sick. I know there's a lot more depth to each of these events and locations, but genuinely all this would be pretty barren if not for the side stories that arise when you visit these areas. They flesh out the characters and the universe in a more in-depth way. Although I can't cover them all, I would like to point out a couple of these storylines, which I think will prove the statement The Witcher 3 has some of the best writing in video game history. First off is the Bloody Baron. I know everyone who's familiar with The Witcher 3 just collectively rolled their eyes at another person covering this questline, but I would politely ask you to shut the fuck up and listen to this track, bitch. That was my Waka Flocka impression. What do you guys think? I think the greatness from the Bloody Baron comes from the moral grayness of the situation. Let's get it out of the way. Yes, he may have beat his wife. Base department? No, I'm joking. But you do know what they say, soft punches do turn into gentle kisses. It's not funny, it's actually just like gross. But yeah, kids, don't beat your loved ones. It would be so easy for this game to just end his character development there and portray him as this irredeemable monster, but it's just not the case. He's a good-natured person who helped us when we needed it and acknowledges his extreme fuck-ups. He's a funny, charismatic figure who is hard to dislike. Sure, he may be an abusive, raging alcoholic, but we also see that the abuse is sort of mutual. The game also makes no effort to brush aside his part in the circumstances and how utterly in the wrong he is and how out of pocket he was in that entire exchange. But it also shows he's filled with regrets and seemingly wants to right his wrongs. The bummer is, it just seems like he can't. He's unable to. I think this makes him the most human out of any character in a video game. He's not the perfect person who decides to turn a new leaf and become good. He's flawed. He's a flawed being who wants to change but finds himself unable to despite the good faith efforts. We see the good side of him and the bad side, and the culmination of him having to take responsibility for his plethora of mistakes with the corpse of his aborted child is heartbreaking. During the return to Crookback Bog quest, we see him lead an expedition into the swamp to rescue his wife who ran away from him and his abuse. So it feels like a double-edged sword because sure, she's pretty much a captive of the witches, but she also did this willingly to get away from the Bloody Baron. When he does rescue her, it turns out her mind is sort of just gone, and she's not all there. There's no happy ending for either of them. His wife is back in the custody of the Baron, and the Baron has a husk of a wife. It's a bittersweet, cold reality that The Witcher 3 is so fantastic at capturing. Oh, and did I mention all of this is just what happened during my playthrough? You very well could see a completely different outcome depending on the choices you make during this questline. If you side with the Forest Dryad, then the Bloody Baron's wife dies and he falls into a spiral. If you side with the Witches of Crookback Bog, you doom the village children to being eaten by them. You're not the paragon of good, and every decision you make has consequences. This game perfectly captures that fact, that you can't have it all. Your decisions matter, and this is just one questline. Another fantastic questline is the Tower of Mice, where you find a spirit who is just doomed to death by her former lover. If you choose to take her to him, she kills him and takes off into the world to spread the plague, just because you wanted to help her get closure. Or you can bring the lover, who is unaware of what really happened, to the Phantom to sacrifice him to this vengeful spirit. That's the good ending of this quest, leading a poor sap to a certain death. The good ending. I also want to quickly highlight how important side quests can be to fleshing out the world. Throughout the Skellige Isles, by participating in side quests and by making decisions, you can shape who becomes the leader of Skellige. It's not just one questline where you pick between two options, but rather a series of quests that flesh out each candidate to help you decide who you think would make the better leader. These decisions are now responsible for shaping the future of an entire nation that you have gotten the chance to thoroughly explore by this point. So it feels vastly more important than just assigning a king to a random place you know nothing about. Skellige has some of my favorite side quests, like the psychedelic journey you take through the caves to appease Madman Lugos, or the entire crowning ceremony fiasco where you have to find out who unleashed the berserkers on the celebration. This all takes place miles from the mainland, and Skellige has its own entire map to explore with quests galore. As far as Witcher contract quests, I've seen some people criticize these as being boring and one-dimensional, but I disagree. Sure, the investigation you do is super bare bones and my dumbass cat could probably figure some of these out, but they serve the purpose of making Geralt feel like a true Witcher, hunting down the local monster menace and getting paid scraps for doing so. My favorite Witcher contract quest is the Beast of Honorton, where you track a local village that has been slaughtered just to find out it was done by a fellow Witcher who was lied to by the village about payment. The village could not afford his fee and instead tried to kill him, in which he rightfully defended himself in preservation. But then he kinda went sicko mode and murdered even the innocent children of the village, so you win some, you lose some. This serves as an important peek into the absolute shit show that is the life of a Witcher, and it's handled fantastically. All of this is just to point out there are tough decisions to make. What? Is this just a word I can't say? I'm balancing my chi. Give me 1 second. All of this is just to point out there are tough decisions to make in The Witcher that have consequences on the outcome of the world and the outcome of your character. Writing is handled so well, with almost every quest having shades of gray when it comes to morality, and it helps nail the grim, hopeless feel of the continent. Life is cheap. You will experience that firsthand. The way conversations are handled is also fantastic. They don't feel like exposition dumps, but rather conversations that actual humans would have. It's such a small detail, but the way they nail common speak just adds to the immersion because I feel like I'm talking to people, not NPCs. I love the writing of The Witcher 3. Now to the presentation. I've said this before with Baldur's Gate 3, but it's hard to judge a game based off how realistic its graphics look. Technology is evolving rapidly, although it does appear like it's starting to slow down, at least in the constant upgrades of graphics. But I still dislike talking about how realistic things look because tech changes. That being said, I think with the upkeep CD Projekt, how do you say the Slavic one? CD Projekt Red? Sure. Has done with the updates and next-gen upgrades, The Witcher 3 looks fantastic. I also think, more importantly, the look and feel of the world leads to the brutal aesthetic The Witcher series is known for. It's populated with small farming villages, set up right next to trees that are used to hang soldiers. It's a bleak world, and the constant hacking and coughing of villagers helps flesh out this dismal existence that everyone seems to be experiencing. This, in contrast, makes the few scenes of beauty stand out far more than they normally would. These golden hour times a day would feel a lot less impactful if it wasn't for the dark, hopeless feel of the rest of the world. It also causes the storms that you come across to feel rightfully depressing and moody, because for once the weather is matching the grimdark feel of the world. The map to traverse this world has gotten a lot of shit due to the map markers, and I do agree with the overall overuse of points of interest. But you can turn it off, and it's not that bad. You can also just ignore them. Plus, sometimes, I may or may not have needed the markers because,
Here's the thing. Fine. Listen, I'm gonna be honest with you. I'm kind of retarded.
If it bothers you, I'd recommend turning them off, but it never really bothered me. And the music. Do I even need to say anything about the music? No. But I will, you little turkey cock. The soundtrack for The Witcher 3, I think is way the greatest. In all seriousness, this soundtrack is so fantastic. I know I've used the phrase it fits the scenes, but with The Witcher 3 I want to emphasize this by explaining how this happens. Let's look at the different themes playing at various locations. We can obviously tell Skellige is inspired by Celtic and Nordic culture, and the music can be reflective of this, usually using bagpipes in their tracks, which don't appear anywhere else in the soundtrack. But it still maintains the monstrous strings that are ever so present in every arrangement, so it still fits in perfectly with the rest of the soundtrack. In Novigrad, we hear plucky lute strings that portray the liveliness to the city, which mirrors the soundtrack you might hear by walking into an old-timey tavern. In Valen, the swampy underbelly of the continent, we hear an ominous lead, which seems to fight the shrill, offbeat string sections that often fly off pitch in the background, which climaxes with the female vocalist's growls. It's fucking creepy, and it's part of the reason that the first interaction with the Ladies of the Woods is so fucking memorable. Speaking of memorable witches, let's turn to designs. The 3 witch designs are so creepy and feel like a Grimm's fairy tale come to life. I love the way the Witcher series will take some folk legends that you may have heard about and transitions it into a brutal, disgusting reality, reflecting the ugly, beastly nature that many of these monsters would represent in real life. Half the fun of the Witcher contract quests is finding out what new monster you can discover. I for one love the trolls that often pop up throughout the story and serve as fun comic relief while looking truly terrifying. The Shriekers, which are like a mix between a griffin and a chicken, or my overall favorite, the Leshen, probably the most memorable creature design in the game. All are a perfect mix of cool and creepy, and even years after I first played the game, the things that stuck with me were the Bloody Baron questline, the soundtrack, and most definitely the design of some of these monsters we fight throughout, like the Leshen. As far as character designs go, I don't know if you can get more iconic than Geralt himself. These designs are definitely mainly in part to the books they are based off of, but still bringing those books to life is a feat in and of itself. I will go on record and say the only reason anyone remembers the Wild Hunt is just because of how fucking sick that armor looks. If it weren't for their design, they would be fucking dust in the wind, forgotten to time. Finally, I wanted to talk about the armor you wear as far as looks go. I'm just going to talk about the only armor you ever should be using, which is the Witcher gear. I love all of their looks, except for the Griffin, and more importantly, I love how perfectly they all reflect the theme of the school they represent. The bear armor looks perfect for the region of Skellige which it originates from. The cat armor is light and agile, reflecting the teachings of that school. It's brilliant, and the designs are so different while also perfectly fitting the typical Witcher look. My personal favorite in the entire game was the Forgotten Wolven gear, which just looks so good. Now for progression. Ironically, for an RPG on the all-time RPG list, I genuinely think some of the weakest parts of this game stem from the RPG elements. The leveling up system is so unbelievably mid. The skill tree you have access to feels so boring. None of the skills feel notable or fun to strive for, rather just your typical boosts in power. The use of mutagens is a somewhat fun idea, but it just feels way too basic and actually disincentivizes the use of different skills from around the tree. The only thing levels feel like they mainly do is allow access to better weapons, which are leveled. However, even this loses its appeal once you get the ability to craft Witcher gear. Then it becomes more of a waiting game where you're waiting to use the equipment that you've already crafted, and then that makes level ups themselves kind of feel pointless. Also, the way the level curve is handled is not great. There's just too much content here. Don't get me wrong, I love this about the game, but you have to understand there are drawbacks to this. 1. Either you don't give as much experience for the side quests, which can dissuade pursuing them, or you give a decent amount of experience and this leads to an overleveled Geralt who bullies every single enemy in the main quest line. 2, the curve would be way too brutal if you planned on basing the level curve on the assumption every player does every side quest, because that just doesn't happen in reality. So in turn, you're left in a tough pickle as a developer. Now normally this is what difficulty options are for, but well, I was on the hardest difficulty. At the beginning, this game felt properly tough, but once you get going, combat becomes way too easy. I think equipment progression is also a little lame. One of my favorite things about bosses in RPGs are the cool loot you get from beating them. It's half the appeal of fighting tough bosses, the reward. I never once used a weapon or piece of equipment from a boss fight. The best thing about beating a monster boss is being able to take their head as a trophy and put it on Roach. In fact, I never used a single piece of equipment I picked up, except at the very beginning. Every piece of gear I looted went directly to the merchants to make some fucking moolah off it. I love the Witcher gear sets. I hate the crafting. Make them the rewards throughout the story, or for like completing side quests. The crafting system is just pig nuts. It sucks. However, it gives you the Witcher gear, so you pretty much have to interact with it. Also, the Witcher gear doesn't even give that cool of benefits. All the armor in the game is your typical increase to stats that are mainly cosmetic. This didn't change until the DLC where they added cool bonuses for the sets, but we'll get there. This also applies for the mutations in Blood and Wine. I think the best progression system in this game is the length of your beard. Cool little detail, but what the fuck? Why is this a focus of game design? Oh, and don't you worry, IGN in their cool little facts section made sure to include this bit of trivia. They fucking eat that shit up. Final note to end on for this section. At the beginning, you are Geralt, and at the end, you are also still Geralt. There's no real character development for Geralt himself. The only real difference is how you can control Geralt better. This is coming from a Geralt stan who loves his character and voice acting, but he's still his own character who doesn't really go through much growth, if any. Now for combat. I genuinely think The Witcher 3 gets too much grief for its combat. Can it get repetitive? Sure. Is it Winnie Hut Jr. levels of difficult? Uh-huh. Yet it's still satisfying. Sure, it is a rough imitation of Dark Souls combat, as admitted by the developers, but I think this is fine. There's a sort of dance Geralt does with his sword swings that combines with the upbeat, energetic combat music, which makes combat feel almost rhythmic. Doing cool pirouettes and sidesteps makes you feel agile and graceful, like a Witcher. Timing counters is loads of fun, and doing a finisher after beating the last enemy feels gratifying. If you were just some fucking guy in this game, I would be a little harsher, but you're Geralt. You are notorious for your skill in battle, so it makes sense that he controls so well in combat. I think the series sections kinda show how boring this game would be if you could teleport and zip around the battlefield. As grizzled and competent as Geralt is, he's still a human. I think where the problem lies is the lack of progression. Combat at the beginning is almost the exact same as at the end. You do have access to a sort of magic called signs, where you pull up a quick menu, choose your sign, and assign it to your quick use. And this is where The Witcher 3 could have flourished. By having cool abilities you unlock from these signs, you could switch up combat and make it fun to run through. Unfortunately, there isn't anything that's really that cool. All the upgrades are kinda boring, and Quen is just so good that there's no reason wasting time upgrading the other ones because they don't lead to anything as cool as just not getting hit for one attack. That is until the DLC, but I'm not finished, damn it. The potions and oils are cool in concept, and they add an additional layer to combat, but the potions don't really have any cool effects except boosts in strength / time slowing, and the oils are a pain in the ass to use and assign. It takes away from the excitement of combat, having to pause every time an oil runs out. Boss fights are also slightly underwhelming. There is nothing in the main game that quick attack, dodge can't solve. Rinse and repeat until you've won the game. Bosses are definitely hard carried by their design and spectacles of these fights, which, don't misunderstand me, are cool as fuck. They just lack difficulty and mechanics that could make them interesting. This goes especially so for that final boss fight against Eridan. It's the final boss fight, and the most unique thing he does is teleport occasionally. Don't get me wrong though, some of these fights slapped. Fighting the ghost of a Witcher in the Mind Quest was a highlight for the entire combat system, especially the scene that plays if you lose. Editor's note in post, that was also a DLC. Fighting the witches as Ciri was such a cathartic payoff that was genuinely kind of difficult, but these are far and few between, and I wish more effort was put into the mechanics of boss fights. Also, I don't know where else to put this, so I'm just gonna tack it on at the end here. Gwent fucking rips, dude. I had a fucking grand old time just playing Gwent whenever possible. I was an absolute little fiend with the monster deck, and I enjoyed this minigame so much. Gathering Gwent cards was the best loot in the entire game. Genuinely my favorite game within a game of all time. Get fucked, Blitzball. Now on to companions. It's you, Geralt, the main character, and a couple of babes. I forgot that not every game has companions. My bad. I'll kinda do what I did for Vagrant Story and briefly touch on some of my favorites. Bloody Baron. I think I've said all I can say on him. I remember in high school being an absolute simp for Yennefer, and replaying it now I have come to realize she is ungodly levels of toxic. Like, she's kind of the worst, but still slightly sympathetic. Seeing the levels of depravity she is willing to go through to get Ciri back revealed a side to a character that she desperately hides, and I like this aspect. I wish there was more like this to humanize because she's kind of fucking heartless. Geralt is supposed to be this cold-hearted butcher of Blaviken, but he looks like fucking Saint Francis next to Yen. But it's my understanding that's how she's written in the books, so maybe I just don't like her character. Too much poison, not enough vinegar. I still believe she is the best option for Geralt, and I think part of the attraction he has for Yennefer is how crazy she is. It's just not my cup of tea for a character. Next, I want to touch on Triss. Pause. She feels like the story had no idea what to do with her. Every interaction is just awkward due to her and Geralt's past, and that's unfortunately it. Yeah, she cares about the mages and whatnot, but her character is bland. At least with Yennefer, you get loads of personality, as icy as it is. Next is Dijkstra, who is such a fucking bastard, but I love him for it. His ending is so fucking lame it makes no sense. I feel like my hand was forced. But oh well, I guess, just doomed Redania for no real reason, cause I didn't want to kill Roach. My bad, I suppose. His speech about why he cares about killing the crazy King Radovid is my favorite piece of monologuing and voice acting in this game. It actually kind of made me love him despite not liking him. Does that make sense? Showed off his layers, like an onion. I also love all the other Witchers. The scene with Lambert and Eskel getting drunk together showed off the brotherly bond between them all, which usually just gets told you rather than shown to you. Every scene with the three of them really made me like them more and more, and I felt close to them, like they were my friends. Vesemir. I love media that has the balls to kill off characters when their arc has been completed. Geralt is the wise old wolf now. Vesemir has kinda outlived his purpose, and rather than dragging him along for the ending of this trilogy, they killed him and allowed him to serve as another character's motivations. Plus, he was so likable that this scene held real weight. You missed him. The inclusion of Lotho also felt like a beautiful full circle moment. As I've said, I've never played The Witcher 2, but I'd imagine if I did, his character would have been even cooler. I love his cool, calm, southern delivery of his lines. He sounds like he'd be the type of fella to pack a sick lip full of dip. Oh yeah, brother, me too, brother. I'm just kidding. Please don't tell my mom. That was my finger. That wasn't an actual dip can. Please don't tell mom. And he truly feels like a cold-blooded killer. It's nice to see him get a sort of redemption arc in this game. Finally is Emir the Emperor, Ciri's father. Save for Geralt and Dijkstra, I think he is my favorite. He's in charge of this black-clad army that is laying waste and dooming the entire continent, and he comes off as a black-hearted son of a bitch. So why did it hurt me to lie to him and tell him that Ciri died? Sure, he's intimidating and very demanding, but his search for Ciri is genuine, and we see that maybe this emperor is not as evil and one-dimensional as he comes across. Something to think about, I suppose. Finally is Ciri. Playing as Ciri felt so impactful towards the final reunion between her and Geralt, where it put in the shoes of Ciri, and I love her character. Sure, she's hot-headed and quick to action, but so is Geralt. Her design is fantastic, and her scenes with Geralt help build a relationship between the two and make it believable. Geralt is the awkward father, and Ciri is the apprentice, who will surely pass the master one day. I don't know where the Witcher series is going from here, but if it follows Ciri, I genuinely would not mind, and I would still happily play. Now, normally this would be where I start wrapping up The Witcher 3. But as you can tell by the timestamp, we have a little bit more to go. I want you to do me a little favor. Pause this video and type in Google, what is the best DLC of all time?
asleep amidst the trees. That's all asleep.
I don't care how old this video is, I guarantee you Blood and Wine will show up numerous times alongside like Critical Darling's Shadow of Erdtree. Also, Blood and Wine is only one of 2 major DLCs for this game, so I figured it is of the utmost importance to talk about them in their own category. So let's start off with the other, Hearts of Stone. Remember earlier when I was complaining about stale bosses that weren't difficult? I think Heart of Stone was created just to prove me wrong and show that CD Projekt Red can do these bosses right. That first Prince Toad fight slapped me silly and embarrassed the fuck out of me in front of the fucking hot new babe that Heart of Stone introduces, Shawnee. The entire DLC is filled with memorable boss fights that I may have forgotten to record. I'll just talk about them anyways. The Ghosts of Olgierd's Past fight was brutally difficult that punished you for getting too sloppy with your attacks. The Caretaker fight also had a mechanic that would heal himself if you didn't hit him at the correct times. And the hallway fight with the Wraith in the Mansion is one of my favorite set pieces of a boss fight in the game. The introduction of Gontaro Dim and his significance within the plot felt so intimidating and interesting. To this day, I still don't know what he is. All I know is he is unholy and he has crazy levels of strength, and also he seems to have some sort of code that he abides by. He is so interesting as a sort of villain, as he seems larger than life, like the devil himself. Von Elric is also a layered man who we see firsthand falls victim to his ambitions, revealing himself to have a titular Heart of Stone due to his immortality. You start off liking him, then hating him, and finally sympathizing with him. The 3 main quests have varying degrees of importance in my opinion. I think taking his brother Vladimir to a wedding in Geralt's body is a really fun idea that the game capitalizes on, and it's a nice lighthearted reprieve from the rest of the DLC. The heist is cool in concept, but it doesn't really go anywhere, so I'm indifferent to it. The mansion part was definitely my favorite of the bunch and gave you important context to Olgierd's story and past. The Runewright edition feels pretty whatever. I see what they were going for, but the cost to access it is just way too high just to underdeliver. They would go on to nail a better patchwork to the progress system in Blood and Wine. Finally is the addition of Shawnee. I really liked her character and it was a fun callback to the original Witcher games that she appears in. She is also the most normal of like all of Geralt's love interests, so it's a shame that she just appears in the DLC. Shawnee fans, rise up. All in all, Heart of Stone is a great additional storyline to go along with the base game and has some of my favorite fights and moments in the game, yet somehow it still pales in comparison to Blood and Wine. If we were talking story beat for story beat, Heart of Stone might actually be better overall than Blood and Wine. But Blood and Wine does not just bring a brand new story, it brings a brand new fucking world. We are approached by old knight friends who come from the land of Toussaint, who urgently seek Geralt's help in slaying a beast that has been tearing apart the lands. We oblige and end up in the world of saturated to hell Toussaint. Normally, I would criticize the blown out max saturation levels of the environment, but after playing roughly 100 hours worth of game in the downtrodden gloomy lands of The Witcher 3, this new bright and beautiful land was such a breath of fresh air. Toussaint is very obviously inspired by European fairy tales and the mythical land known as Italy. Hey, that was really bad. The start to this DLC is magnificent. Fighting a giant with a knight's helmet on is such a fun way to introduce the DLC, and it's another aspect that years after playing I still remembered. So, with this new land comes new side quests, new armor, and even a new Gwent deck. I quite like the Gwent deck it introduced, got nothing on the monster deck, but it is a close second. I just hated how they forced you to use it in the tournament. Circling back to the main plot, however, we find out there is a vampire roaming the lands, killing off members of a broken up band of knights. Through this, we are reintroduced to an old friend of Geralt, Regis, who is a fan favorite from the books, long thought to be killed off. Regis is one of my favorite characters in The Witcher 3, period, DLC or not. He feels like the closest thing Geralt has to a friend, and hearing them reminisce about old times was wonderful. We find out he's a vampire now, who serves under a higher vampire known as Detlaf, the man responsible for all the killings. Well, kind of. It is our job to find out why. And we do. Quite quickly, as a matter of fact. It's because he's a massive simp, and killed under the orders of Sienna. Sienna? I'm gonna go Sienna. This eventually leads him to unleashing a swarm of vampires on Beauclair, the big city in Toussaint, and in an effort to stop him, we jump into a magic fairy tale wonderland after Sienna. Shit gets real whimsical. Also important to know, we can pork this lady, for no real reason. Just because, I guess. Literally no romantic buildup or flirtation, but gamers be horny, I suppose. This leads to Detlaf attacking us out of frustration, not about porking her, about like about like rescuing her because he wanted to, kill her. In turn, we have to kill him. Probably my favorite boss fight in the entire game. That's the plot. But where I think Blood and Wine excels is in the introduction of new content. I mean, look at this shit. Let me briefly touch on these. I did not know how much I needed a die option until I was given one in Blood and Wine. This feels like such a fun and unique approach to preventing armor from feeling stale, and at this point is kind of the norm for most RPGs, but Blood and Wine was ahead of its time. The new Grandmaster sets were also fantastic. These add an additional upgrade to every Witcher set, and I loved about all of them, except how they massacred my boy, the Forgotten Woven set. They also provided a combat bonus with unique abilities if you had enough of the set equipped, which is a great idea to help these armor sets stand out from one another from more than just looks. The Manicore outfit with the black dye is the hardest in this series, don't even fight me. Also, the new mutation system they added scratched that itch I so desperately needed for additional progression. This is a system that should have been in play from the very beginning. It made signs unique, it added fun new mechanics to your abilities, like letting Ard freeze enemies. Unfortunately, it felt like it came far too late. I would have loved this from the beginning and hate that I got so little time to play with it. I really do hope they add this in the next Witcher from the very start. Finally is Corvo Bianco. I love the idea of giving Geralt a little vineyard to look after and take care of. It's a fun little home base in Tucson. Also, having the ability to hang up your favorite sets of armor and swords in your house feels rewarding for all that work it took to craft and acquire them. Such a basic idea that works just so well. All in all, Blood and Wine deserves the title as one of the best DLCs of all time, just for the pure additional content it brings to the game, and it finally provides a fairy tale location for a fairy tale ending for Geralt. Jeepers. We're through it. No more surprise sections, I promise. Psych! No, I'm kidding. We actually have exhausted the topic of The Witcher 3. There's no use pretending. I fucking love this game. It feels so vindicating to see that I was not quite the fucking bozo I thought I was in high school, and I was fully justified in calling this my favorite RPG. Is it my favorite RPG now? No, but it doesn't have to be. This game is fantastic, and every second I spent in the world of The Witcher felt wonderful. It was a beautiful change of pace after having to kind of force myself to play Vagrant Story occasionally, whereas I never had to force myself to play this. I was looking forward to every session, even the minutia of riding Roach around the world felt engaging. You know what? Fuck the people that are claiming this game is overrated. Plainly stated, they're wrong. This game lives up to the hype and then some. Is it perfect? Of course not, you fucking dingus. Any game that you expect perfection from will disappoint you. But if you just allow yourself to get lost in The Witcher 3, you will not regret it. And I'm going to give The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt an S-.
Brother.
Lovely game, and it felt like a fun trip down memory lane to play once more. So that's all of them. We made it. Thanks for sticking around through my second video, and thanks for listening to me ramble about RPGs. Here's an updated tier list of the RPGs I've played so far, and remember, order matters. Give you a second to digest that list and prepare your comments about how wrong I am. Our next group of games carries an old friend, 2 games I've played almost all the way through, and 2 legendary games and 2 legendary franchises that I've somehow avoided all of these years. Tune in next time, and once again, thank you so much for checking out my video. Also, make sure to check out the videos in the description if any of these games struck your fancy and you want to learn more about them. Okay, that's about it. Deuces, you jabronis.